more on the Volkswagen announcement and the other stories of this past week. We're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Catherine Lévesque, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Good to see all three of you.
Nice
Thanks
to
for
see
having
you.
us.
Tonda, I'm going to start with you here because it was interesting to see the number of swipes the Prime Minister was making against Pierre Poilievre during the announcement in St. Thomas, Ontario. But Poilievre, criticized by the Prime Minister, in part because Poilievre has been critical about the amount of money put into this plant. Was it necessary to invest the billions of dollars, given the fact that the federal government has already signed battery deals with Stellantis and Ford?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the multi-billion-dollar question. Was it necessary? Look, what's interesting also about the fact that they're prepared to throw up to $13 billion at this plant in securing its arrival in Canada is also that it seems to have been a complete change in strategy since even the budget. The government has been telling us that they're not going to do what the U.S. is doing, that they're going to invest at the outset in stimulating production and drawing companies here. Now, all of a sudden, it's many, many more billions than anyone had thought, and at the back end, matching what the U.S. has done. If it does succeed in not just bringing this plant here, but in spawning a whole broader industry, down the road, we'll all look back and say, yes, it was a good investment. But right now, it looks like billions of dollars that people were not advised it was going to be. And I think that the questions being raised about how much transparency we're getting on it are valid questions, and questions this government really doesn't like to answer.
Bob, what do you think? Because again, Pierre Poilievre, I think of just last month, he was on Twitter essentially saying, why is all this money going to a foreign company? Does he have a point, or is he on the wrong side of history?
Well, he does have a point that it's taxpayers' money. How is it being spent? How does it work out? In fact, he wrote today to the Parliamentary Budget Office to say, look, can you provide us with an analysis of this to see if there's value for money out of this, which I think is quite legitimate. Look, I mean, $13 billion for the battery plant, $700 million to build the plant. That works for about 3,000 workers. That's the amount of money going there is 4 times the salary of the employees, which works at like $456,000 per year per employee. Now, if to Tonda's point, if and Volkswagen says this could become the global supplier of electric batteries to Volkswagen, if that is the case, and there's 30,000 or more spin-off jobs in decade time, then we will all be saying, great, good decision. But a lot of these things, there's a history with a lot of those tax incentives. They don't tend to work out. Now, the jury's out, but certainly I think Poilievre has a point to be saying, look, we need transparency. Particularly, if I may, so if those jobs, if there are research and engineering jobs that come there, and not just people assembling batteries, that's real value added, but they haven't said whether that's the case.
Yeah, although it was interesting, Catherine, as we looked at the announcement today, there in and amongst the people speaking to the audience was the local Conservative MP, as was the provincial government, Ontario's government, which is a progressive Conservative government.
Is a former Conservative.
Absolutely, who the Prime Minister noted, better to see you here than in the House of Commons. but all these Conservatives are in the room. Does that present a problem for Pierre Poilievre?
I think so, and I don't think Catherine Lévesque, the MP who was there, had a great time because Justin Trudeau basically pointed at her and said, "See, maybe you should be convincing your own leader, of the importance of these subsidies." So look, I think it's kind of interesting that the Prime Minister felt the need to kind of point out the different types of Conservatives, right? Clearly, the person leading the Conservative Party of Canada is a populist. He's kind of going out and talking down on all these investments. And then on the other hand, you have, Doug Ford, progressive Conservative premier, saying, well, look, actually, we want this money. We want these investments, and this is, these are good jobs. So I thought it was interesting that he felt the need to point that out. But I don't think that's necessarily good news for Pierre Poilievre, right? Because, people have just reelected Doug Ford. I think he's doing relatively well. And Pierre Poilievre is definitely not the same type of Conservative as of right now. I would also point out that Catherine Lévesque, also, it put her in an awkward position also because she did not support Pierre Poilievre in the last leadership race. She supported Jean Charest. So Mr. Trudeau really knew what he was doing there. He was kind of pointing out the differences between the different Conservatives.
It just seemed like a bit of a partisan rant, frankly, in a venue and at an event where Conservatives under Doug Ford's government had come together with the Liberal government to produce what the governments are arguing is a great and a unified venture, and then to go on a partisan sort of rant against the federal opposition in Ottawa, I was thinking, are the VW executives, I mean, they're probably counting their billions, but are they rolling their eyes? You know?
Yeah, and Poilievre hasn't said don't give the money. He's just saying, like, where's the value here? I mean, that's
how much per job, and tell us, right?
Well, the Prime Minister might still be stinging, from the question period on Wednesday, because as we talk about the VW plan, I also want to talk about the Prime Minister's trip to Jamaica, because it was Justin Trudeau who was taking it on the chin on Wednesday over that issue, going to Jamaica, staying with family, friends, as he describes them, but still wealthy donors to the Trudeau Foundation. So Bob, when you think about the controversy this has caused, what's more problematic here? The fact that this is tied to people who donated to the Trudeau Foundation, or is it the fact that the Prime Minister optically went on this very lavish vacation when most Canadians cannot afford to go on a vacation?
I think it's the latter one. And if you talk to experienced Liberals, they would say to you, I would advise them not to do it. So somebody in the Prime Minister's office, or perhaps his wife Sophie, is saying, I'm going to go, and I don't care what the public thinks, because it does send a message of I'm an elite, I'm very privileged, particularly at a time when economic conditions in the country are not that great. But Trudeau doesn't seem to care. I want my vacations, and I want to party and vacation with very wealthy people, and the rest of you can eat cake.
Well, what do you make of it? Because Tonda, because the Prime Minister does make the argument, it was cleared by the ethics commissioner, although
they don't even use the word cleared, right?
Yeah.
They say, we ran it by the ethics commissioner to ensure we were following the rules. And the rules are that if you're a real friend, which he wasn't in the case as it was determined by the ethics office, in the case of the Aga Khan vacation in Barbados several years ago, in this case they've deemed it, it was a family friend for legit, but still the Prime Minister might have considered the optics and even offered to pay a going Airbnb rate, for example, in order not to be looking like they're taking gifts from wealthy friends. I think it is the Liberals' kryptonite, this stuff, this elitism. It is an easy target for the opposition. And so why does he allow himself to be vulnerable to those attacks? I'm not sure. To Bob's point, I think it's probably true that they just shrug their shoulders and figure he can breeze his way through this. Because, look, he hasn't suffered from more damning allegations back in the blackface scandal. A lot of Canadians essentially didn't run him down for that because they decided he wasn't a racist. Well, by doing this, he is declaring he's rich and he's got rich friends and he's got elite circles to move in. And seemingly, though, he thinks Canadians will shrug that off. To Bob's point about the economic conditions facing most households, will they? We'll see.
Yeah, well, Catherine, the big question is why, as Tonda is saying, because again, if you remind Canadians, it's just not this trip. It was the trip to the Aga Khan's Island. It was also being in Tofino on the first day of Truth and Reconciliation. What is it about this Prime Minister, or perhaps his office, that allows these types of scandals to keep happening?
Well, I mean, essentially, since he's been Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau has had about the same group of advisors, and he's had Katie Telford, who's been there for years and years. And basically, his inner circle has just gotten smaller and smaller, and there aren't as many diverse voices, maybe, or people from the outside telling him, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. But I will say, in Radio Canada's piece, Radio Canada broke the story this week. There apparently was discussions in the Prime Minister's office, and some people said, well, maybe we should reconsider, or it's not clear where the disagreement was exactly. My understanding is it might have been about should we consult the ethics commissioner or not on this trip. So I think some Liberals are just getting very, very concerned, increasingly concerned, and we're hearing more and more people asking the question, as it has been for years, why is Katie Telford still there? Is she, still the right person to be the Prime Minister's chief of staff, because she's so close to Justin Trudeau, and she's, maybe blindsided to all these, different this narrative that the Prime Minister has ultra-rich friends and maybe, doesn't care about ethics all that much.
I disagree with the fact that it falls to Katie Telford or it falls to Sophie Trudeau. It falls to Justin Trudeau to make the call about what works for him.
Yeah.
And so I think no matter what kind of advice he's getting, good or bad on all of it, really make the call yourself. And if that's the call you're going to make, then you should wear the questions in question period for more than one day, by the way.
Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, each time, he doesn't see it as a problem, though. He says, well, those are family friends. I've went there dozens and dozens of times. I've been friends with them for more than 50 years. So visibly, he doesn't see a problem with what he did. So, he should have I'm saying, yes, ultimately this is his decision, right? But he should have advisors out there, challenging him and telling him, hey, this is not a good idea, and this is, going to go back to you.
No question.
Although,
it stops with him, though.
Yeah, it stops with him, except, though, he hasn't really had to pay a price for his past mistakes either. Like, I think it certainly galvanizes...
The narrative begins to add up. When you get into an election campaign, I can remember Brian Mulroney doing this with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He put forward a positive vision, and then he went after all the Liberal scandals. And there are a lot of Liberal scandals. And, the funny thing about Poilievre, I saw what he put out on the weekend, which was a very inspirational speech talking about ordinary people and how valuable they are and what they make, their contribution to Canada. And you are the people that make this country. And then you say, oh, that's a stump speech that's going to be successul. And then he does these crazy tweets about the CBC and and you go like, what are you doing? Because there is a path to victory for Poilievre, but it's got to be one where there's a positive message. And you can paint the Liberals negative light for a lot of things, but you've got to get off this childish partisan stuff that he seems to be getting involved in. It's like he's not grown up.
I think that what we're saying is that there's competing narratives within. So the Liberals have a competing and challenge to carry a consistent narrative that they care for ordinary Canadians and they understand their financial plight. Poilievre also has a challenge because, while he seems to be going after big issues of importance to Canadians, on that issue, he's playing small ball and nastily, and it's not working to his favor.
Okay. Well, my bad news is that we're out of time.
No.
My good news is you are the people that make this panel. So, Bob Fife, Tonda MacCharles, Catherine Lévesque, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.